And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, March 23rd. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, with travel season ramping up, the CDC just hit a record number of volunteers to help monitor any viruses that might be on the move. Plus, a strategic alliance between the Federal Laboratories Consortium and FedTech is looking to speed up how federally funded research becomes real-world technology. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Trump administration is sending industry mixed messages when it comes to artificial intelligence. On the one hand, the White House is emphasizing the use of commercial products and standards. But on the other, recent action by DoD and GSA sends exactly the opposite message. For more on how the administration is causing confusion and concern in the federal market when it comes to AI, Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller joins me now. Jason, thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, Terry.
Not a day goes by when we don't talk about AI. How has this administration promoted the use of commercial AI tools and services?
There's several things that the administration has done over the last year that really has just come out and said, hey, use these commercial AI tools, right? So if you go back to July, the AI action plan that came from the White House, Jessica Tillotman, who's an associate dean for government procurement law studies at the George Washington University, told me she thought the AI action plan was very hands-off. It was one of the most, what she called vendor-friendly overarching policies they've seen in maybe a long time. Then you look at some of the things that the General Services Administration has done around the OneGov deals, right? Like these deals are low cost, right? Top of the line models, giving agencies access to, and GSA is basically saying, hey, we want to lower the barrier. So you test it, you try it out, you try to, can we use this for certain mission areas, right? So they're trying to make it easy to use and then stick with what those tools are, whether it's, you know, Anthropic Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, what have you. And then if you look at what the Office of Federal Procurement Policy has been doing with the FAR overhaul, again, real big focus on commercial standards and practices, real big focus of buying commercial technologies, reducing barriers to entry for vendors, right? So all these things are really sending a message that says, we want you to come work for the government and we're going to try to make it easier for you.
But DoD and GSA did some stuff recently that kind of turned that all upside down. Talk us through that.
Right. So on the other hand, you have the DoD Anthropic dispute. Now, folks haven't been paying attention. Basically, DoD has labeled Anthropic, their Claude large language model, what they call a supply chain risk. President Donald Trump ordered all agencies to stop using this large language model. And basically, there's a disagreement over contract terms, right? Claude and Anthropic doesn't want DoD to use it for mass surveillance of Americans or autonomous weapons. DoD says, hey, we bought this. We could do whatever we want with it as long as it's within the law. So there's this kind of headbutting. DoD came out with a basic policy that says all DoD must remove Anthropic products from its systems. Defense vendors must certify they're not using Claude in any of their DoD work within 180 days. So I think that's one thing that's just, wait a minute, you just labeled an American company a supply chain risk because you have a contract disagreement. And then the same day DoD did that, March 6th, GSA releases a 9-page draft clause for their scheduled contracts that really would turn up a lot of the scrutiny on AI tools. There's a host of requirements, but some are, you can only use American AI systems. You have to disclose all AI systems used in performance of this service. The requirements that the government owns all data and all custom developments. And then the one that's really stood out to me and that I've been told from a host of experts is they're going to have the vendor hold their third-party vendors accountable for meeting the requirements of the clause. So the flow down to subcontractors and subcontractors is very difficult. Now, GSA is accepting comments on this draft clause, and they actually extended those comments for an extra 2 weeks. So now they're due April 3rd. This is at the request of many, many vendors. But the point here is that is the exact opposite message of what GSA had been sending around, again, the OneGov deals and other kind of uses and promotions of AI.
Jason, you're so cued into industry on this topic. What are they saying they're concerned about when it comes to the mixed messages that all of this creates?
The concern and confusion that this is causing is well, what do you want us to do? Do you want to use commercial practices? Do you want us to follow, if you will, what's happening in the broader community? Or do we want government-only rules and regulations that apply to it, right? So take GSAs as an example, draft AI clauses. One industry observer who requested anonymity said, this will be very difficult for organizations to meet as written today. And the concern they have is, would agencies and vendors start moving away from the GSA schedule, right? If these are very laborious, a lot of barriers to selling through and buying from, would they just use other vehicles, whether it's NASA SOUP or a different GSA contract like Alliant 3 that's just getting awarded, or Polaris, would they want to get access? And that would go against what they've done with this. It really does undermine the OneGov deals, which were all based on scheduled contracts and lowering the price, lowering the barriers of entry. I also talked to Rebecca Sellos, a former senior analyst at the Government Accountability Office. She's an expert on acquisition issues, and she says the mixed messages also are part of the way the government's trying to wrap its head around making sure the AI is secure. How do you protect your supply chain? How do you protect the AI tools from adversaries? She also talked a little bit about, you're also asking companies to do things that they aren't prepared to do. So again, we want to use commercial practices. Here's what's done in the commercial world. Oh, but now we're asking you to do something on top of that, which defeats the purpose of saying we want to do commercial tools, use commercial services, be more like commercial. And finally, Tillotman, again, the GW attorney, talked about, hey, in a lot of ways what GSA is doing makes a lot of sense because they're trying to add more oversight and governance to the AI tools. But she said instead of using a scalpel, they actually used a hammer. And whenever, you have that kind of analogy, you know that they've just gone too far and they're asking too many to do too much. And that setting that baseline just sends the wrong message.
Jason, they are going to have to move quickly to sort this all out. I mean, AI is not waiting for anybody to get their act together. So what are some things that we should be looking for over the next few months as this administration tries to develop a coherent approach to AI?
Well, just on Friday, the administration did release a new AI legislative framework. Now, a lot of this is really focused on the private sector. It's really focused on the commercial sector. It's really focused on schools and kids and things of that nature. So I think you're going to see some legislation coming from Capitol Hill. What it will eventually look like, who knows? That's pretty well far advanced. As far as these two issues, let's start with the DoD Anthropic. Anthropic has taken DoD to court. The Defense Department is still trying to remove Claude out of its systems, its workflows. You're seeing very similar. GSA has removed Claude off the schedule. The Treasury Department has announced it's not using Claude anymore, or will wind down how it's using Claude. So a lot of agencies are starting to take these steps. But because Anthropic took the government to court, it's going to be interesting to see where the court lands, what those hearings are like. If the judge actually issues a temporary injunction to the supply chain risk, because this also sends a really bad message more broadly. Hey, if you don't agree with the administration, we'll label you a supply chain risk. So would a new company, would a vendor who's saying, hey, maybe I'll get into this government space. Hey, maybe I have this cool new AI widget that I want to share with the DoD or with agencies. Maybe I don't want to do this because if we have a disagreement, instead of just canceling a contract, they're taking this to the nth degree. So I think there's a lot there that to watch. As far as GSA and the AI tools, I think GSA extending the comments by 2 weeks is a really positive sign. I think a lot of people in the industry are like, hey, we want to make this better. We understand what you're trying to get to, but we think you're in the wrong direction. Let's help you make this better for everyone. So I think we'll see a new refresh for the schedules and that this will come out. GSA said the current refresh number 31 the AI tools will not be in there. They said probably in refresh 32, whenever that comes out. It could be a few weeks. It could be a few months.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks for talking us through this. I know we'll be coming back to this in the future.
Plenty more to watch, Terry. Always my pleasure.
You can find Jason's story at federalnewsnetwork.com. And join me Tuesday for a deep dive into GSA's draft AI clause with Dan Ramish from Haynes Boone and Jim Carroll from the Professional Services Council. Up next, a strategic alliance between the Federal Laboratories Consortium and FedTech is looking to speed up how federally funded research becomes real-world technology. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A new alliance between the FLC and FedTech is aimed at solving a long-standing gap, connecting federally funded R&D with entrepreneurs ready to build real products and companies. The partnership promises practical support for labs, small businesses, and regional innovation ecosystems. We'll explore what's ahead with Paige George of the Federal Laboratory Consortium. Paige, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Terry. I'm really excited to be here.
The Federal Laboratory Consortium is an interesting group, and you've just announced a 3-year strategic partnership with FedTech. This is supposed to, as I understand it, strengthen connections between federal labs and private sector entrepreneurs. What is it that FLC was looking at that made you feel like this was the time for a partnership like this?
So the Federal Laboratory Consortium has been around since the 1970s, and our primary mission is to help accelerate the transition of federally developed technologies to the commercial marketplace for the benefit of the United States. FedTech's mission is very similar to ours, but they offer business accelerators and help these small business take federal technologies and start new businesses, startups, and really bring that technology to the marketplace. So the Federal Laboratory Consortium is really that step one. And so a partnership with FedTech is really a natural evolution of a long-standing relationship that we've had with FedTech over the years.
Are there other groups like FedTech that could potentially be part of this partnership as it moves forward?
Oh, absolutely. The FLC partners with many national organizations like DefenseWorks, like Miltech. We have a page on our website where you can actually go and view all of our federal partners. And so what this does, it allows, FedTech to be a more strategic part of our ecosystem, even though we've had a fantastic relationship with them.
And how do you envision their role as a bridge between the government laboratories that FLC represents and the private sector?
So FedTech has already long-standing relationships with many of the federal agencies, including defense, health, every sector of the federal government. They have programs like the Crucible and other national accelerators. And so for us, we are looking to be able to provide more of a pathway for our federal laboratories to provide innovation to FedTech, to say this is a critical piece of technology that we would love to have FedTech help us market, help find potential end users, help find businesses that could use this technology to create, commercialized technologies that can then go into the marketplace.
Walk us through how that might happen. Some brilliant scientist at a government laboratory invents a better mousetrap. What happens next?
So for that laboratory, they would, first have to patent that technology. And once that technology has been patented and it can be viewed by the public, what we would do is, as the Federal Laboratory Consortium, we would take that patented technology and put it on our website. We have something called FLC Business that lists all federal technologies that are available for licensing among all 300 federal laboratories in the United States. And so what we try to do is highlight some of those really important technologies that have a high value to the marketplace. And so then we would say, hey, FedTech, we have this fantastic new mousetrap that came out of Frederick National Laboratory in the Department of Energy. This has a fantastic potential for commercialization. And so then we could easily pass that technology through FedTech, and then they would take it and do their magic on that technology, find a partner, find an organization, find a person that is ready to start a business, and then they could actually accelerate that technology and walk a small business through those critical steps in technology development. Some technologies come out as a patent at a very low TRL. So maybe a potential licensee needs some help with further development. And that's also where we can come in as FLC and say, hey, FedTech, if you find someone that wants to license this technology, we can connect you to the scientists and engineers at Frederick National Laboratory or whomever develop that technology, and they can partner with that company to further that technology development. So that's another piece where FLC can provide assistance to FedTech, because it's not just necessarily the patent license agreement or the licensing of that technology. We can work together under a cooperative research and development agreement where the federal labs can offer other resources other than just that intellectual property to help develop that technology.
I'm speaking with Paige George. She's the Federal Laboratory Consortium's Facilitate Committee Chair. So, Paige, let's follow on with that. So you're an agency manager, perhaps, and you're overseeing an R&D portfolio. How will this partnership between FLC and FedTech benefit them?
So for the laboratories and for the agencies, FedTech has already played an incredibly important role. They work with the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, NASA, DHS, DISA, and NNSA. So they already have very strong partnerships with these agencies. And so for the FLC, we are just going to help them make more connections with the actual technologies that are coming out of these labs that can help augment these already strong partnerships that FedTech has cultivated.
And those partnerships also emphasize regional innovation ecosystems and connecting small businesses to federal labs. How will this partnership now help agencies maybe expand their supplier base or find new organizations to partner with?
Absolutely. So regionally, the FLC focuses a lot on regional ecosystem acceleration and development. So one of our other national partners, NAPEX, this is a Department of Defense Technology Accelerator Program. They have Apex accelerators all over the United States. And so we can partner with them as well and say, hey, Apex, we have some technologies that are being developed within your region. I think that you should help FedTech maybe find companies that can then move through FedTech's programs like Crucible or Ensign Foundry, or, again, the list is very long for FedTech's programs that they already have. So FLC can, again, be kind of the center of a network of technology acceleration and development.
With the gap in authorization of SBIR and STTR, is this partnership and FedTech's role a way of sort of covering that gap until those programs might be reauthorized?
It could be, but so FLC doesn't really get involved too much with CBRSITR, and it has been reauthorized, so that is wonderful breaking news that CBRSITR has been reauthorized. But again, FedTech can help technologies and help companies find CBR opportunities, and then again, we can come in and say, hey, we can help augment your CBR through a partnership with a laboratory. So you're in a CBR phase 1 and you need help with prototype development, then FedTech can help and FLC can help find critical partners for these CBR contracts.
So for those folks, those innovators, those small businesses, or even the labs right now, as they're listening, what should they be doing to plug into this partnership? Are there specific programs or pilot opportunities or initiatives that are now available?
Absolutely. You can go to federallabs.org and you can check out the FLC business website, and that'll provide you a list of all of the available patents from all the labs. You can also figure out what labs are in your backyard and what their mission areas are. So if you are looking into, getting into a specific technology sector, you can go to FLC Business and find a lab that would match with you. And then another pathway is to go through FedTech and go the other direction. So if you're participating in one of FedTech's programs, you can say, hey, I really need to find a laboratory that can help me develop my technology. FedTech can come to FLC and say, hey, what laboratory could this business partner with? And so that's really kind of the pathway for how we can work together.
As this partnership between FLC and FedTech matures, are there metrics that you're going to be watching for to sort of assess the power and impact?
So there are a few different ways that we can track metrics with FedTech. One can be potentially the number of new startups that come as a result of this partnership. So if FedTech is working with a number of small businesses, and because of their relationship with us, they have been able to license 10% more technologies over the year. That's one way. Another part of these partnerships, there are memorandums of understanding. And so Ben Solomon from FedTech has always spoken at our FLC national meeting over the years. So like I said, this is more of a way to codify a relationship that has been very long-standing over many years. So we have the MOU in place now, but we've had a fantastic relationship with FedTech for a very long time.
I've been speaking with Paige George. She's the Federal Laboratory Consortium's Facilitate Committee Chair, and she's also the Technology Transfer Director at Naval Surface Warfare Center, Panama City. Paige, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Terry. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, practical politics and some strategic horse trading may be returning to Congress. But first, with travel season ramping up, the CDC just hit a record number of volunteers to help monitor any viruses on the move. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Over 1 million people have now participated in the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's traveler-based genomic surveillance. The purely voluntary program helps to detect and respond to emerging public health threats. To learn more about the scope of the program and what this milestone means, Federal News Network's Eric White spoke with Heather Reese, who leads the TGS program at the CDC.
And that program is what brings us here today, the Traveler-Based Genomic Surveillance Program. Why don't we start by just getting a little background on what it is and how it came to be and who it involves. That'd be great.
Absolutely. So the Traveler-Based Genomic Surveillance Program, or TGS, was launched in 2021. It monitors for infectious diseases among arriving international travelers at select U.S. airports and consists of 3 complementary approaches. So the first one is voluntary anonymous nasal swabbing of inbound international air travelers arriving at those select U.S. airports. That's where we've just reached that 1 million participant milestone. And then the other components are aircraft wastewater sampling. So either through individual aircraft and then also through a triturator location, which really acts as a combined pooled wastewater sample. So all those samples are sent to the lab, tested for COVID, flu A, B, RSV, norovirus, adenovirus, and Mpox. And samples that test positive for select pathogens are then sequenced. And together, all those data help us get timely detection of pathogens of public health concern or emerging strains or variants.
For a program like this, the more the merrier, and the better the data, the better you can tell if there are any strains of those diseases you're scanning for. Can you just tell me about the significance of having 1 million participants in just... It only took about 6 years or so. I don't even know if other government agencies would be able to pull that off so quickly.
Yes, since the TGS program is completely voluntary and anonymous, reaching 1 million international traveler participants since the program started in 2021 is actually a really significant milestone. It means the public is interested in supporting public health and disease detection, helping us react faster to these incoming disease threats. Program wouldn't be possible without them.
Yeah, on the detection front, if you could explain what that means to have that sort of lead time and how that can help with any response efforts, and if there's any stories of success so far that you'd be able to share.
Absolutely. So the TGS program allows us to use the air travel network for timely detection of pathogens of public health concern or these emerging strains or variants when international travelers land at the airport. And this is often before they're circulating broadly within U.S. communities. So a great example of this was this past summer. The TGS program, together with CDC influenza scientists, identified and reported the first 2 sequences of flu subclade K globally. So at that time, there was increased flu A activity globally, but this was far before the flu season had started in the US. So because we got those early detections that this new clade K was arriving at international travelers, the CDC was on alert for domestic cases and was able to prepare both, public health and healthcare providers to expect to see those eventual cases. This also accelerated our CDC and public health laboratory access to samples for further viral characterization. That's important because that allows us to assess the potential impacts of these new emerging strains on diagnostics or therapeutics. And in this case, these data also supported research efforts on influenza antibody response.
We're speaking with Heather Reese. She's the lead of the Traveler-Based Genomic Surveillance Program at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Since we are talking about public health, and you've reached 1 million volunteers, so there's a lot of trust there. But since participation is voluntary, is there an anonymity to the results, or how does the program balance surveillance and privacy concerns?
Yes, since participation is completely voluntary and anonymous, international travelers arriving at those 8 U.S. airports where TGS operates have the opportunity to really opt in and provide nasal swab samples for the program. This program isn't really designed to do case finding. We can't connect an individual with their test result. It's really intended to track changes in pathogen levels at a population level. This program cannot connect a specific traveler to their test results. So the program isn't designed for it. It's designed to allow us to track trends in pathogens of public health concern or these emerging strains at a population level and monitor new variant strains or mutations as they come up.
It does keep in mind, though, of where that passenger just arrived from, I imagine, though, right?
Absolutely. We do collect information on the participants' travel history, and that part allows us to really fill gaps in global biosurveillance data. So these pathogens and variants might be circling in different countries, regions of the world where testing and sequencing information might be limited. And so this gives us a snapshot of what's going on before it gets to our shores.
And just go over who's involved in this, what assets of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and also any partnerships that you have. You said you're at 8 airports. How do you approach that, asking different airports, hey, can we come on in and swab some of your passengers?
Absolutely. Strong partnerships are key to creating a network that allows for this early and efficient disease detection. So the TGS program wouldn't be possible without CDC subject matter expertise across various disciplines. Our industry partners, both Ginkgo Biosecurity and Xwell, who they're really our implementation partners on the ground and do a lot of our laboratory testing, as well as you mentioned, those 8 airports, as well as participating airlines. And of course, the public. So this program wouldn't be possible without their continued support of the program.
Looking forward towards the future, any plans of expanding to other airports, or are you all just good with 1 million so far?
Well, we continue to collect nasal swab samples from travelers who arrive at those airports. We're considering to understand how this program can best and most effectively and efficiently capture these trends.
Gotcha. And, I imagine the results, do you see any sort of specific trends? Obviously, during cold and flu season, you probably see some upticks, but as far as varying between seasons and everything like that, are there kind of natural occurrences that you see flowing through, or is it kind of erratic in the results that you see, a spike here or a spike there sort of deal?
So several of the pathogens that we track, as you mentioned, SARS-CoV-2, RSV, and influenza A and B are seasonal. So we have those expected seasonal surges, but because we're really tracking global circulation from those international travelers who are arriving from about 130 countries every week is what we capture. You'll get the seasonal fluctuations in those regions of the world in addition to what we consider the classic respiratory virus season in the wintertime here. As far as emergence of new strains or variants of concern, that's, there is no clear schedule for that. So we're always on alert and monitoring to see if something of potential concern might be popping up.
And I don't want to put any doomsday scenarios in anyone's head or anything like that, but were you to see a sharp spike in a new strain of, let's say a new version of COVID, I mean, it was all about how quickly we could react at the beginning of the pandemic. Are there procedures in place for you all to sound the alarm bells if something does pop up?
Absolutely. And I think that's where we can lean on our strong partnerships. So when we were constantly seeing these data come in, these data take between days to just a little over a week for us from sample collection to seeing those results. And so we are constantly monitoring to see if anything of potential concern pops up. We work very closely with those pathogen home programs with those CDC scientists across the agency, as well as with other partners, so that we can react quickly and understand, is this new thing that popped up something that we should be concerned about or something we should just continue to keep an eye on?
All right. Heather Reese is the program manager for the Traveler-Based Genomic Surveillance Program with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Eric.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, practical politics and some strategic horse trading may be returning to Congress. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Facing pressure to act on national security and domestic priorities, lawmakers appear more willing to negotiate across issue lines. That includes DHS funding and confirmations, questions about authorizing military operations and funding them, and unresolved bills touching surveillance, housing, and financial policy. To assess whether this moment leads to real progress, I'm joined by Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP, Mitchell Miller. Mitchell, thanks so much for joining me.
You bet.
Hey, the Senate worked this weekend after a very busy week last week that included the confirmation hearing for Senator Mullen for Secretary of Homeland Security. So let's start with that. How did it go?
You know, I think aside from the personal clash between Kentucky Senator Rand Paul and Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin, everything went pretty well for Republicans. They feel like he is now on a glide path to be confirmed later this week on a Senate vote. Obviously, there was a little bit of fireworks. Very interesting. You rarely see something that personal, especially between senators. Sometimes you see that in the House. But the fact that they had this dispute going back nearly a decade, and basically Markwayne Mullin said some things that Rand Paul thought were basically saying that it was okay to get beaten up by a neighbor in this crazy dispute that he had, and they went at it. So it's pretty rare for the chairman of a committee who is responsible for recommending an administration nominee to go against that nominee in a vote. But it was balanced out by Democrat John Fetterman from Pennsylvania. So I think overall the confirmation hearing went pretty well. While a lot of attention has been given to Markwayne Mullin's propensity for some strong language at times, after all, he's a former MMA fighter, he does also have a reputation as somebody who's very bipartisan. He actually had a Democrat in the room when he was undergoing this hearing. So it's going to be an interesting thing when he actually gets confirmed, because when that happens, it's very likely that he will be confirmed for a Department of Homeland Security that still technically is not funded because we're still in the partial government shutdown. So that's a very unique situation.
He did seem to indicate in his responses to questions that he would make some changes at DHS. Are those going to be enough to break the deadlock on the funding for the agency?
I think that'll play a role in it. I also think what's really important is last week they finally got members of both parties into a room, which they had been talking about doing for quite some time, and they got the border czar Homan in there and said, let's try to talk this out. And the White House has been making some concessions, and Democrats, even though publicly at times have downplayed them, particularly Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Another good sign, frankly, is that when Democrats came out of that meeting with Tom Homan last week, they didn't really say a lot. And that usually indicates that they are making progress and they don't want to jeopardize anything. So this is going to be a critical week, obviously, for getting that done. And obviously also we've seen the lines getting longer and longer at all these major airports across the country, with more than 10% of TSA workers who are not getting paid calling out sick. This is the scenario that you and I had talked about for quite some time, right, and it's finally about to come to a head.
Well, spring break travel is getting a lot of news, as well as the second missed paycheck for TSA folks. So we'll see how they go this week.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think that they feel that they have to really do it this week, because Senate Majority Leader John Thune indicated last week that if they don't have anything done by the end of this week, he's going to keep senators in session again this coming weekend until something gets done, because otherwise they're going on break. And a lot of these lawmakers, however they feel about these issues, just don't want this hanging out there, especially during that heavy traveling spring season.
They'll have to get it back through the House, right, before it goes to the president for signature?
They will. So that will also be another bit of drama that we'll have to see how that goes, because there are going to be changes. And so that means it does kick back to the House. I'm sure we'll hear a lot of complaints and the beating of chests about various issues related to that. And then ultimately, I think it will be up to President Trump to get the Republicans in the House in line, which often is what has to happen for it to finally get passed.
I'm speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, let's shift our focus to Middle East operations. There were a number of hearings about the current operations last week. How did those go?
Well, right now, there is a lot of concern among members of Congress about what the cost is going to be. And we've had a variety of votes in connection with war powers resolutions in the Senate. We're expecting another one in the House this week. And the other thing was we had the top intelligence officials at one of those hearings, of course, the World Threats hearing. And we got a lot of back and forth between especially Democratic lawmakers and Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, who said effectively that DNI is leaving it to the president to determine whether there was an imminent threat. That has left a bad taste in the mouths of a lot of Democrats on the committee. And then there was also the White House floating this $200 billion supplemental funding in part for the war. I think that is going to be in trouble because until we get details of it, a lot of people, including Republicans, are skeptical of the costs. It is also possible that funding could become a big grab-all, if you will, for a lot of other issues. There's matters like farmers, for example, are looking for aid. They've been hurt hard by tariffs. There are a whole host of issues that they are talking about stuffing into a supplemental. Of course, getting that passed is another issue. And as we've talked about, Republicans are still toying with the idea of trying to do it through reconciliation so that they can pass it on their own. However, when you get to a bill that is this big and with all these different competing interests, they know that that's going to be difficult as well. So that's definitely something we'll be keeping an eye on.
It is a big increase. The first initial word about a supplemental was $50 billion, so 4 times as large.
Right. And I asked Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, about that. And he said, look, I'm not going to support this until I get a better explanation about where the end game is for this war with Iran. And that is a feeling among many Democrats. Many on the more liberal side feel even stronger. Senator Warner is more on the centrist side, but even he has a lot of big questions about this.
Well, those are 2 really big topics that both chambers are going to have to deal with this week. But there's a lot of other legislative movement up there. The SAVE Act has been getting a lot of big headlines, and it seems to be driving the broader legislative agenda. Walk us through how members of Congress are considering that and other things like housing and FISA and banking. I mean, they've got a smorgasbord of legislation to consider.
They really do. And that part of the reason that a lot of people were concerned about having the SAVE Act take up all this floor time, which it did over this past weekend and will continue through this week, is that there are all these other issues that are out there. Now, of course, to Republicans, getting a national voter ID is very important. And there's been a really hard push among conservatives to try to get something done here. They feel like they have to make this a priority, especially because it's the top legislative priority for President Trump. But what that also does is it kind of pushes aside a lot of these other key issues that you're talking about. For example, the housing issue, the Senate passed housing legislation, and many consider it the most significant housing legislation in decades. But the problem is the House. There is a lot of concern about what is being done in connection with whether or not there are going to be onerous, at least in the view of GOP lawmakers, new regulations related to getting housing provisions through, for example, community banks. So what they are trying to do is actually do some legislative jujitsu, if you will, and put some of the housing legislation into cryptocurrency legislation, and basically saying, okay, we didn't get this in the Senate bill, but we'll get it in this other bill. So if you have a problem with it, House Republican member, then you can vote for this crypto bill and you'll still get what you want. So that's just one example of kind of the funny things that are taking place legislatively. And then the other one, as you mentioned, Section 702 of the FISA. This has, of course, been a very big issue whenever it comes up for renewal. And what's interesting is a lot of the positions positioning on that has shifted. For example, one of the key people who used to be opposed to it, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Jim Gerton, last week said that he now says he will vote for an extension of FISA. This would be an 18-month extension of this warrantless surveillance legislation that essentially allows the U.S. to undergo surveillance of people overseas. But there has been concern, particularly among conservatives as well as liberal Democrats, who say that they worry that Americans can somehow be swept under this and that they may be surveilled. So we'll have to be watching that as well.
Maybe there's a silver lining there. It sounds like some good old-fashioned horse trading going on to get some of these pieces moving.
Right. I mean, that's a great point, because what is legislating but usually horse trading? But there really has been precious little of that in recent years. For some of us, we actually remember these things called conference committees, where you actually had people from both sides of the aisle or both the House and Senate getting together to work out those differences. And we are starting to see a little bit of that. I alluded to that earlier in connection with those talks related to DHS. That's the kind of thing that has to happen. If you're going to get something done where two sides are both backed into their corners, ultimately they have to come out of their corners and they have to compromise. And at least a little bit there, we're starting to see that.
I've been speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, it sounds like it's going to be a busy week.
It is indeed. Another one coming up.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. President Trump's new choice to lead the Department of Homeland Security is advancing towards Senate confirmation. Markwayne Mullin had his nomination hearing before the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee last week. In some cases, he tried to present a sharp contrast to outgoing Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now for more details. Justin, thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Terry.
Justin, walk us through the status of this nomination in the Senate. Where's it going?
Well, Markwayne Mullin had his confirmation hearing on Wednesday, and then on Thursday, the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee voted to pass him along to the Senate floor. And it looks like, according to Senate Majority Leader John Thune, he could be confirmed as DHS Secretary as soon as Monday. And if that happens, he will inherit a department that is in the midst of the second longest government shutdown in history. Of course, this shutdown is specific to only DHS, but it is certainly grabbing the headlines with those long TSA lines at airports right now.
There were a lot of television-worthy moments in the confirmation hearing. If he is confirmed, how different do you think he'll be as Homeland Security Secretary?
Yeah, there certainly were a lot of viral back and forth sessions between, Mullin and Committee Chairman Rand Paul. One of the interesting things that Mullin did say about, a policy or his policy as DHS Secretary, if confirmed, is that he would revoke Kristi Noem's policy, that she personally review all DHS awards over $100,000. This is a very controversial policy because, according to industry sources and members of Congress, it really gummed up the works at DHS across the board. First and foremost with disaster assistance that's passed through FEMA, but also with cybersecurity contracts and even Trump administration priorities like border wall construction. This policy has been in place since July 2025. Noem said it was aimed at rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse. But as we've said, this has really become a controversial policy because it's a huge department to be having the secretary approve every single $100,000 contract that goes through it. Mullin said he would, quote, absolutely revoke that if he's confirmed.
That's called micromanaging, and I don't know if Secretary put that in or someone else did. I'm not a micromanager. We put people in, we empower them to make decisions. What is required to come up to my level will make decisions. We will have a very clear line of communication with every one of our agency's heads on their authority that you gave to them within their parameters, and we'll discuss. But we're also going to be very responsible for the taxpayer dollars.
I'm sure that will make some folks breathe a little bit easier. Secretary Noem has also caught a lot of criticism for changes she's overseen at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Did Senator Mullin say anything about his plans for FEMA?
He did touch on that a little bit. He was asked about it by Senator Andy Kim. Of course, the Trump administration, President Trump himself early on suggested his administration could, quote, get rid of FEMA. And Kristi Noem took to saying that FEMA should, quote, be eliminated as it exists today. There is a FEMA Review Council that actually put together a draft report that suggests major changes and staffing cuts at FEMA, but the finalization of that report has been delayed since December, so it's unclear kind of how those recommendations move forward. But the upshot is that FEMA has lost thousands of staff over the last year, and further potential cuts are on hold due to an ongoing court case that is challenging those reductions. Mullen was asked about all this, and he said that he doesn't see a need to eliminate FEMA, but he also didn't rule out further staff cuts.
As I said, I think it needs to be restructured, not eliminated. Pretty sure that you guys set the policies and the mission for FEMA, so for any serious changes, it may take actually policy changes.
So beyond those issues of letting $100,000 contracts move along and sorting out what will happen to FEMA, immigration enforcement is a top focus here. Did Senator Mullen say how he'd be approaching that?
Well, Mullen has been a big backer of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement policies in his time in the Senate, and there's no reason to think that he's going to obviously reverse course on those policies on, ramping up deportations, things like that. He did say that he wants to get to a point where DHS is no longer in the headlines every day and on the nightly news every day, suggesting that he's certainly, at this point in time, not an endorser of Kristi Noem's kind of high-profile immigration enforcement agenda that really kind of doomed, ultimately, her time as Homeland Security Secretary within the last few months. Of course, there's a lot of questions about who's calling the shots about immigration enforcement. You have Stephen Miller still at the White House. So you have Border Czar Tom Homan. So to what extent Markwayne Mullen will actually have a lot of control over that issue remains to be seen if he's confirmed.
Well, this confirmation is moving along at a rapid pace, maybe one of the fastest in recent memory. So beyond the topics that we've talked about here, what else do you think people will be watching for?
I think a big one, at least for our audience, is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and how Markwayne Mullen oversees that, to what extent he tries to kind of shore things up there. Because CISA has lost about a third of its staff over the past year, going from around 3,400 to 2,200 or so in the last year. They've lost a lot of senior executive folks. They've lost a lot of cyber talent in general who are leading some pretty high-profile cyber programs. He was asked a little bit about this during the hearing by Senator Maggie Hassan. He kind of just said, we've got to recruit the right people for cybersecurity. He also was asked if he would add people back into CISA, and all he said was that he doesn't know what the mission requires at this point, but will be adequately staffed, and we need to find the right people. So nothing much there during the nomination hearing itself, but that will be something that I think a lot of folks in this space will be watching closely. How does Markwayne Mullen handle that really important component in CISA?
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for keeping us up to date. Senator Mullen will certainly have a very steep learning curve once he's on the job.
He certainly will. Thanks for having me, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. The Defense Department is accelerating modernization for Mission Advantage, and Federal News Network is breaking it all down. Tuesday and Wednesday, join top leaders from Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and industry as they explore AI, cloud, DevSecOps, and software factories. Don't miss it. Visit federalnewsnetwork.com to register now for the DoD Modernization Exchange. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.